On the night they told me to get out, my own son didn't say a word. My daughter-in-law screamed that I'd ruined their lives. My granddaughter threw a slipper at me. And my grandson just watched. No one stepped in. No one defended me. So I packed one bag and walked out into the cold, alone. A month later, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. 50 missed calls, one message. Mom, please. It's about Dylan. He's missing. That's when I knew they weren't calling to say sorry. They were calling because the lie they built was about to collapse. And the one they cast out was the only one who could still save what was left. This is the story of a mother who stayed quiet for too long, and what happened the moment she stopped. You're watching Whispers of a Mother, where the voices they tried to silence come back stronger. If you've ever been blamed for loving too hard or staying too long, subscribe now, because this time, we tell the truth. The slipper hit the wall behind me. Not hard enough to hurt, just loud enough to let me know I wasn't welcome anymore. You ruined our lives. Get out. That's what Trisha, my daughter-in-law, screamed from across the kitchen. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't hesitate. It was steady, cold, certain. Martin, my son, the only child I ever raised, stood behind her, his arms crossed like a shield, mouth locked shut, not angry, not sad, just blank. And my granddaughter, Kayla? 22 and fearless in the worst way, she laughed. Not a soft laugh, a sharp one, like she'd been waiting to see me brought down. My grandson Dylan watched. That's all he did. Just watched. No one stopped them. No one said, that's enough. No one even flinched. So I went into my room, packed a small bag, and walked out into the cold night. No shoes on my feet, just slippers. No plan in my head, just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort. The kind that follows you like a shadow you forgot was there. It wasn't sudden. Not really. When families fall apart, they don't explode. They unravel. Quietly, slowly. Stitch by stitch, until one day there's nothing left holding anything together. A month passed. I didn't call. They didn't ask where I went. That house kept turning, and I kept breathing somewhere else. Then the phone rang. Not once. Not twice. 53 missed calls and one text. Mom, please. It's about Dylan. He's missing. And right then, everything changed. Not because I was scared, not because I missed them, but because I knew they weren't reaching out because they finally saw me. They were reaching out because the lie they built was starting to crack. And the only person who'd ever truly seen Dylan was the same woman they'd pushed out. Me. Before the yelling, before the slipper, before the front door closed behind me, there was a moment. I was standing in the hallway holding one of Martin's old t-shirts, still warm from the dryer. I thought I was folding laundry, but I was folding years of being small, of being quiet, of never asking for space that was mine. Then I heard her, Trisha, screaming about what I'd said, about what I'd ruined, about how I'd opened my mouth, and all I could think was, when did telling the truth become a betrayal? I didn't know what I had done. Not really. They said I talked on a phone call. They said I said too much. I remembered the clinic, a routine call. The woman on the line asked about household income. I'd said Martin, my son, did some side work. Just odd jobs. He was on disability, yes. But sometimes he painted houses, did repairs. Everyone did that these days. Just a comment. Nothing more. Apparently, it was everything. That little truth, that offhand sentence, sent a report into motion. And in their eyes, it wasn't a mistake. It was treason. I stood there, holding that t-shirt like a flag. And my family? They lined up like it was a trial. Trisha in her robe, waving papers. Kayla with her eyes full of fire. Simone, Trisha's sister, arms crossed like a spectator at a game she paid to watch. And Martin, still silent. What did I do? I asked. Quiet, not weak, just tired. They didn't explain. They accused, they judged, and then they erased me. That's how it happens, you know. Not with a bang, with silence, with looking away, with pretending you don't exist, right before telling you you're the reason everything is falling apart. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream, because deep down I knew this wasn't about a phone call. This was about years of being the convenient scapegoat, the extra mouth, the shadow in the hallway, the one they never thanked but always expected. That night, I walked into the cold. One coat, one bag, no goodbye, just the soft slam of a door that was never really open to begin with. But you have to understand something. That night didn't begin with screaming. It began like most mornings in that house did, quiet, loaded, and careful. Because long before they told me to leave, they were teaching me to disappear. I'd wake up early, not because anyone needed me to, but because my body still thought it was 1984, back when Martin was young, and I was the only one holding everything together. I'd start the coffee, fold the towels Trisha left damp in the dryer, wipe down counters that would be dirty again in 2 hours. That was my rhythm, my ritual, not asked for, not noticed, just done. By 7, Dylan would pass through, hoodie up, earbuds in, eyes glued to his screen. He never said much, not because he didn't care, because silence is what we both learned keeps the peace. By 10, Kayla would drift in like a storm on the edge of a calendar. Sunglasses, complaints, always some new disaster she expected someone else to clean up. Trisha would appear mid-morning, looking polished, judging the light, checking her phone, her voice always starting with, "I really wish this house could be quiet." I was already invisible by then. That was the rule. Be useful. Be invisible. Be quiet. Smile if you can manage, but never, never ask for space that belongs to someone else. Martin, he worked nights, or at least that's what they said. Some weeks he didn't leave the house at all. Claimed back pain, paperwork, whatever kept him home and kept me guessing. The tension between him and Trisha always seemed to boil just beneath the surface, rising every time money ran low. But I didn't ask questions. I'd learned long ago. Asking made me the problem. My room wasn't really a room. It was the laundry cave, tucked in the back next to the machines, no window, no closet, just one dresser drawer, the bottom one, the one that stuck, and a few plastic bins where I kept what little I owned. The rest of the space claimed. Trisha's coats, Kayla's overflow shoes, a forgotten hair dryer, bits of other people's lives crammed into a corner I was lucky to borrow. And I told myself that was enough. They let me stay. That's what mattered. That's what I believed. But it wasn't just the things. It was the way they acted like I wasn't there, except when they needed me to be. Simone, Trisha's sister. She didn't live there, but you wouldn't have known it. She walked in like she paid rent, poured coffee I bought, read mail that wasn't hers. And every time she passed me in the hallway, it was like she was checking for cracks, smiling just enough to make her condescension look polite. "Still hanging around, huh, Evie?" That's what she'd say. Like I was squatting in my own son's life. They made the house feel like a sorority I wasn't allowed to rush. I was the background noise, the unpaid maid, the memory they resented but couldn't throw away just yet. And I stayed, because leaving felt worse, because I thought Martin needed me, because I didn't know the line had already been drawn, and I was on the outside of it. Then came that morning, the one that changed everything. I was making toast. Simone strolled in wearing Trisha's robe, leaned on the counter like it was hers. "Hey, Evie," she said, syrup sweet. "You talked to anyone at the clinic lately?" I looked up, confused. "Just the insurance lady. Why?" She smiled too wide. "They ask a lot of questions, don't they? About the household, income, that sort of thing." She sipped her coffee, that fake grin still fixed. "Hope you didn't say anything they could twist." I nodded, thinking nothing of it. Just the usual. Who lives here? What we all do. Nothing strange. And I went back to folding laundry, back to pretending everything was fine, back to being the furniture. But something in the way she looked at me stayed, like she already knew what I hadn't figured out yet, that a storm had already started, and I was its target. I didn't see it coming. Not after that coffee. Not after Simone's little smirk. Not even after the envelope came in the mail. Because when you spend years shrinking yourself, you start to believe the silence means safety. You start thinking that if no one's yelling, no one's hurting. That maybe staying out of the way is enough to be loved. But silence can be a setup. And mine, the life I'd built on walking lightly, on not asking for anything, was about to collapse. It started with that phone call. Just a routine check-in from the clinic. I'd gone in for blood pressure and a refill. The woman on the line was polite, just checking records, address, household members, anyone contributing income. So I answered, honestly, automatically. I said what was true. That Martin was on disability, yes, but that he picked up odd jobs sometimes. Painted a porch last month, fixed a neighbor's steps. Just little things to help out. It didn't feel like a secret. It felt like survival. I didn't know that single sentence would trigger a report. I didn't know the system that barely keeps anyone afloat could turn one honest word into a weapon. I didn't know that my family, my own blood, would take that moment and twist it into an excuse they'd been waiting for. But the very next morning, Martin opened that envelope, thick, white, government seal in the corner. He didn't say a word, just scanned it, slid it under a magazine, and left it there like a bomb that hadn't gone off yet. Then Trisha turned to me. "You say anything on that call?" she asked. Her voice was flat, empty, but I felt the edge underneath. I blinked. Just the usual questions. Who lives here? What we all do. "What truth?" she snapped. And right then I saw it in her eyes. Not panic, not fear, a plan. This wasn't a discovery, it was an opportunity. She already knew what had been said. She already knew the damage. But what she needed now was someone to hang it on. Someone quiet, someone disposable. And I fit the part. Simone called it out from the hallway. "Oops, cat's out of the bag now, huh?" Martin still didn't say anything, but his silence was louder than any accusation. That night, they didn't leave the room when I entered. For the first time in weeks, they stayed. Not to speak, not to explain, but to watch, to let the shame settle in, to let me stew in it, to let me understand I wasn't just being blamed, I was being framed. Within 48 hours, everything shifted. The tension wasn't hidden anymore, it was scripted. Trisha on the phone, pacing the hallway. Everything's frozen. His check, our coverage, all because of one damn call. I stayed in my room. I knew better than to interrupt a performance. But I heard every word. Through the drywall, through the years of learned silence, I heard it all. Yes, he's on disability. No, I don't know who told them. No, I don't know why this is happening. Click. Dial tone. That's when I understood. This wasn't about the system. It was about control. It was about power. About who they got to blame when things went wrong. About who they got to punish when things got tight. And that lesson, the real one, hit harder than any of their words. They didn't want me gone because I'd spoken. They wanted me gone because I'd been there long enough to witness everything, long enough to see how they treated each other, long enough to hear the fights, long enough to remember who Martin used to be before he became someone who could stand behind a woman who threw his mother out. And that was dangerous. Because someone like me, quiet, patient, forgiving, we're not threats until we finally tell the truth. Then suddenly, we're the problem. That's what broke me. Not the accusations, not the yelling, but the realization that I was never going to be anything more than a convenient villain in their story. I had loved them all, fully, without conditions, and they had only kept me as long as it served them. And the worst part, it wasn't the yelling. It wasn't even the silence. It was the look in their eyes that said, "You were never really one of us. Not really. You were tolerated, managed, kept around because you were useful, not because you were loved." That realization, it doesn't come all at once. It builds, slowly, like frost under the floorboards. You don't notice it until your feet go numb and it's already too late to find warmth. I had spent years, decades, telling myself I was part of their home, that maybe love just sounded different now, that maybe I was old-fashioned, out of touch, too sensitive. But what I was disposable. And nothing teaches you that faster than when your own child, the boy you carried, the boy you fed when he had nothing, stands still while his wife throws you out like trash. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I packed my bag slowly. A t-shirt of Martin's still folded from laundry. My pills, a coat, a photo album I couldn't leave behind. As I zipped it shut, I could hear them laughing in the kitchen. Not nervously, not uncertainly, celebrating. Simone's voice took long enough. Kayla muttering, "About time." Trisha pouring wine. It wasn't just exile. It was a performance, a ritual. The final scene in a play they'd been writing behind my back. I passed Dylan in the hallway. He didn't move, didn't speak, just watched, earbuds dangling, eyes wide. The only one in that house who hadn't struck the match, but who also didn't stop the fire. And that silence, it cut worse than Kayla's slipper, than Trisha's words, than even Martin's retreat. Because Dylan was still a child. And even he understood that to love me out loud meant choosing sides. So he didn't. Not yet. But what burned deepest wasn't that they pushed me out. It was how easily they convinced themselves it was justified. Like I'd committed some sin so grave that I deserved to be erased without dignity. Like decades of sacrifice meant nothing. Like I hadn't once paid their rent when Martin lost his job. Like I hadn't watched Kayla when Trisha needed a weekend to reset. Like I hadn't stayed small for so long just so they could breathe easier. I used to think the pain of being unloved was the hardest to carry, but it's not. It's being remembered as the problem, as the burden, as the one they had to survive. That kind of rewriting, that quiet assassination of character, it doesn't leave bruises. But it does something worse. It makes you question who you were at all. I laid in that studio apartment the first night, surrounded by chipped paint and a broken lock, and I didn't feel relief. I felt erased. And the questions started to whisper. Was I really that hard to live with? Was I too involved? Too nosy? Did I deserve it? That's what emotional betrayal does. It doesn't just leave you, it makes you leave yourself. Because somewhere along the way, I had confused endurance with loyalty, silence with strength, and staying with love. But here's what they don't tell you. Being quiet for too long can kill parts of you that never grow back. I used to think it was noble. Now I know better. Staying silent for the sake of family is only noble when the family deserves your voice. And mine? They weren't looking for peace. They were looking for permission to turn me into a ghost. And the moment I spoke, the moment I told one truth, I stopped being safe for them. Because people like that, they don't fear lies. They fear memory. Because memory, real memory, doesn't stay buried forever. It whispers, it lingers, and eventually it finds a witness. That witness was Dylan, the quiet one, the observer, the only one in that house who didn't raise his voice and didn't need to. Because his silence wasn't indifference. It was survival. But when the house turned on me, he saw it all. And when they started laughing, he remembered. I didn't know in that moment how much had registered, how much he held inside while pretending not to see. But I should have, because that kind of quiet always has roots. I found out the truth when the phone started ringing. Not once, not twice, 50 times, from the same people who'd erased me without a word. The same ones who hadn't asked if I was safe, if I had food, if I'd made it to the shelter in one piece. They weren't calling to say sorry. They were calling because their lie had slipped, because the one person left who still had a soul had finally walked out. And that person was Dylan. I ignored the first wave of calls, thought maybe they were checking if I'd talked, or if I planned to ruin them further. But then came the message, from Kayla, voice high, shaky. Grandma, please. Dylan's missing. We can't find him. I froze, because I knew, not just that he was gone, but why he left. I could feel it in my chest before I even checked the voicemail. They hadn't lost him. They'd pushed him out. I called the school, spoke to a counselor who remembered me from years back, kind woman named Ms. Reed. Her voice softened when she spoke. He's been having a hard time, mentioned you a lot. I closed my eyes. Then she said it, the truth I had suspected, but still wasn't ready to hear. He said he wished he could live with you. That home didn't feel like home anymore. She paused, then continued. There was a fight. His sister said he was weak for defending you, called him a traitor, told him if he loved you so much, he should just go live with his precious grandma. My breath caught, and just like that, every cold glance, every door that slammed, every silence he swallowed, it all became clear. They hadn't just bullied me. They'd infected him with the same cruelty, trained him to see kindness as betrayal, turned love into a weakness. And when he wouldn't join the act, when he chose not to turn against me, they turned on him too. That's what betrayal looks like when it runs in layers. It doesn't stop at one victim. It keeps moving until the ones who remember who you really are get pushed out too. The next call came from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something told me. This time I should, and then I heard it, his voice. Grandma, he whispered, like the word hurt his throat. He was safe, staying with a friend, quiet, shaken, but safe. Can I come to you? He asked. Those 5 words, they undid me, because they weren't just a request, they were a surrender, a declaration, a child choosing truth over performance. They lied, he said. They made it sound like I ran away, but they're the ones who threw me out. He told me everything, how Kayla mocked him, how Simone laughed, how Trisha didn't speak, and how Martin, his own father, told him to stop being dramatic. I didn't cry, not right then, because I needed to stay clear, because I knew what had to be done. I told him yes, you can come. Yes, you are safe here. Yes, you belong, even if the rest of them forgot how to see you. And when I picked him up, standing alone on the sidewalk, hoodie pulled tight, duffel bag at his feet, I saw it in his eyes. The final match had been struck. The house that once exiled me had finally collapsed from within, not because of me, but because of the rot they'd hidden so well. And Dylan? He was the only thing left worth saving. We didn't speak much on the bus ride home. We didn't need to, because some bonds speak loudest in silence. That night, we ate toast and watched a stupid show on mute. And for the first time in months, I slept. Not because the world was fixed, but because one person still knew who I was. And that was enough. And that feeling of finally being seen by just one person, that's what saved me. Because it reminded me, this story isn't just mine. It's happening in kitchens across this country, in basements, in guest rooms. In every quiet corner where an aging parent is told to stay out of the way. It's happening to mothers who raised children alone and are now being told they're too much. To grandmothers keeping families afloat while being asked to shrink smaller and smaller until they disappear. What happened to me wasn't a singular cruelty. It was the result of a slow cultural erosion, where older women are treated like broken furniture, kept around until inconvenient, blamed for the cracks they didn't create, and punished the moment they become inconvenient truth bearers. Because that's the real danger, not just being older or being poor or even being dependent. It's what happens when you refuse to stay silent. Because the modern family, for all its performative smiles and online photos, is carrying a deep, unspoken sickness. We're ashamed of where we came from. We parade independence, hustle, and self-made pride. Until the bills stack up, the kids need watching, or someone gets sick. Then we remember the mother, the grandmother, the woman in the back room folding towels, but only as long as she stays quiet. The moment she speaks, the moment she calls out dysfunction or slips up and reveals the truth, she becomes the scapegoat. That's not just my family, that's America. We don't make room for aging women with memories. We hide them. We whisper about them. We accuse them of being difficult, dramatic, senile, because if they start telling the truth, the whole house starts shaking. You see, when I spoke on that clinic call, I wasn't betraying anyone. I was doing what they'd always told me to do. Tell the truth. Be honest. Don't lie. But those rules were only for me, not for them. And that's the thing about emotional injustice in families. It always comes dressed in the language of virtue. We're just doing what's best. You misunderstood. You're making this harder than it needs to be. But at its core, it's about power. And the easiest person to strip power from is the one who's already been taught to stay grateful for crumbs. That's who I was. Grateful for the guest room. Grateful for silence at breakfast. Grateful to be ignored. But not anymore. Because Dylan's hug, the way he walked into my small apartment and said, "This feels better already," that was my proof. That love, when it's real, doesn't need a big house, or matching chairs, or silence. It just needs safety. And maybe that's the lesson so many of us forget, because we've spent our lives proving our worth with service. But the truth is, you don't owe your voice to people who only want your silence. You don't owe your loyalty to people who weaponize your love. And you never ever owe your suffering to anyone, not even your children, especially not them. Because loyalty without dignity is just servitude, and motherhood without respect is not sacred, it's suffocation. And now I breathe. Not just for me, but for every woman who's ever stood in a kitchen holding a dish rag while the people she loved decided she no longer belonged. We do belong. Not because we serve, but because we survive. And so I breathe. For me, and for all of us who stayed too long, hoping love would remember us. But here's what no one tells you when you're the one they erase. The moment you walk out is the moment you come home to yourself. The healing doesn't happen with applause. It happens in quiet kitchens, over mugs of tea no one else poured, while folding your own towels, not because you have to, but because you choose to. That's where I am now. No longer a guest in my own life, no longer performing motherhood as penance. Just a woman finally able to say, I was never the villain. I was just the mirror they couldn't bear to look into. And Dylan? He became the reflection I never knew I needed. He didn't just come to me. He stayed. He helped hang his drawings. He kept the fridge stocked with lists he made himself. He passed me toast without asking questions, just knowing I liked the edges not too burnt. No apologies, no explanations, just presence. And presence, when you've been invisible for years, feels like a revolution. The day we got that court order, just a sheet of paper saying what we already knew in our bones. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just walked out of the courthouse with his hand in mine and thought, this is what it feels like to matter again. Not as a placeholder, not as a problem, but as a person. And maybe that's the real ending. Not a dramatic scene, not a doorstep confrontation, not even justice served cold, just peace, earned, lived, and shared. Because this small apartment, with its creaky bed and secondhand chairs, became a place where someone could feel safe again, where no one throws slippers, where laughter doesn't sting, where silence isn't used as punishment. That's what healing looks like in real life. It's not perfect, it's not tidy, but it's real. Dylan doesn't talk about them anymore. He doesn't need to. He's moved on. He started sketching again, even applied for a youth art program at the local center. I just make breakfast and listen. Because now I understand. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is simply not be the thing that hurts them. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do for yourself is to stop waiting for the people who broke you to fix it. Because they won't. And because you don't need them to. What you need is space, time, a place to sit without shrinking, a room where your voice isn't a threat, a day where no one calls you dramatic just because you dared to feel. I have that now. Not because they gave it, but because I stopped asking. I don't know if the silence from their end will last. Maybe one day they'll try to re-enter the story. But here's what I know. I won't trade peace for proximity again. And if Dylan ever forgets who he is or who he came from, all he'll have to do is look at the walls, the drawings, the grocery lists, the way the light hits the kitchen table in the morning. He'll remember that love doesn't require suffering. That home is built, not assigned, and that sometimes the best families are the ones we rebuild from what they left behind. So if you're listening and you've ever been told you were too much, too needy, too dramatic, too hard to love, just know this. You were never too much. You were just too honest for their comfort. And one day someone, even if it's just yourself, will be brave enough to sit with your truth. And when that day comes, don't hide. Welcome it. Because that's the real whisper of a mother. Not the cry for help, not the scream for attention, but the quiet, steady voice that says, I'm still here, still whole, still worthy, and finally, free.